There's nothing I likes better on a fine sunny afternoon in early spring than to visit the countryside of my forefathers. My first call is to their resting place, abroad in the little graveyard at Listowel, the fort of Elton. The sturdy church tower has weathered the centuries well, to stand as a memorial to the monastic community that toiled and prayed there until they were plundered in the aftermath of Henry VIII's Reformation in the 16th century. From here I gets my first view of the place I was born on, the hillside of Cunnacanore, the hill of the harvest, referring to the festival of the harvest, which in ancient times was celebrated on the last Sunday in July. On my way up I meet some of the old neighbours, but the man I'm most anxious to meet is my own cousin, Harry O'Sullivan. Harry always takes me on a tour of the old ground, for which he have great affection. Indeed, it had given him life and health for the past 89 years. Harry was lucky to have been born strong and healthy, and so survived the hard labour of quarrying stones in nearby Boland's quarry for the greater part of his married life. Thus he was able to help in providing materials to build the roads in North Kerry and to supplement the poor return from the land on the mountainside. He loves to talk about old times and customs like smoking and sharing pipes at wakes, where he first learned to smoke over 3/4 of a century ago. Like myself, he has no notion of parting with his pipe until his dying day. Looking across the rolling countryside towards Ballongford and beyond, I recalls my mother telling me about the famine period, when she made the journeys on foot overland to Saline Quay, a distance of 9 miles each way, to collect the yalla meal from the boats to feed the starving people. Even in the bronze sunlight, there's a bitter cold purity in the air that blows in from the Atlantic Ocean, and this have given disease-free cattle and also long life to the people who've stayed on the mountainside. There's no trace of our old home here now. Every part of it have returned to the earth from which it was first put together. There were 11 children in our family, would you believe it? 7 boys and 4 girls. Some of my brothers I've never seen at all. As soon as the eldest brother reached the age of 20 years, he'd emigrate to help make way for and feed the remainder of the family. When I was about 7 years old, that's right, my mother sold out the little farm to help pay the passage to America for an older brother, and we came to live and settle down in the town of Listowel. When I started to serve my trade first, on leaving school in the year of the 1916 rising, there were about 60 shoemakers in the town of Listowel. The travelling shoemakers, or the journeymen as they were called, would have increased its number by 20 or more, I'd say. Even up in Ballygolog, which was, well, you might say it was detached from the town in those days, there were 4 shoemakers. There was Nadine Burke, Denny Bunce, Moshe Halloran, and the best known one of them all, Dave or Mocky Sheehy, whose house still remains much the same except for the roof as 'twas in those days. His son, Davine, who also worked at the trade, he still lives there. Every street in the town had its quota of shoemaker's shops in those days. I started myself as an apprentice at Pat's Harness on Church Street, next door to Paddy Finucane, the harness maker. Oh, I worked from 9 in the morning to midnight, 6 days a week, for the princely sum of 1 lousy shilling. After 6 months, I left Pat's to work with the master shoemaker, Moss Bonnie O'Connor in Charlotte Street, until I'd mastered the trade in about 3 years. My own street, comprising I'd say 10 houses, yeah, that's right. Well, that was a hive of industry. Ned Wilmot was a blacksmith, he shod horses. Billy Bahan was a whitesmith, he repaired farm machinery. Mickey Lyons was a tinsmith, he repaired everything. He made everything, I'd say, from tin pennies along to creamery cans. And then there were 2 nailers, they were brothers, and 4 shoemakers. Tom Bawn, Nedine Sweeney, Ned Odell, and of course yours truly, I needn't tell you.
Joe Hickey doesn't claim to know the author of the expression, cutting without edge, but he will swear on the souls of his forebears that the same author was definitely not a shoemaker. The uppers for handmade boots were usually supplied by cutters, who specialised in this part of the trade. But on the seldom occasion that Joe made the uppers, he cut the parts with the aid of patterns which corresponded with clients' measurements. The client's feet were measured for length, width, and around the instep. Allowances had to be made in the case of young people with growing limbs. A record of each client's measurements were kept, and this was consulted for future orders and guarantees. In the case of a Sunday or better class boot, the uppers, comprising of toe cap, the vamp with tongue, 2 backs and back strap, were made with fine leather, preferably box calf or glossy kid. The lining for the upper was made of sheepskin, and this was attached to the upper by a method called piping, whereby it was stuck at the edges with a paste of flour and glue to keep it in position for stitching later. The experienced tradesman was able to mark the position of the eyelets without need for measurement. The eyelets were cut with a cutting punch, a little tool fitted with various sizes of punching bits, depending on the type and grade of boot being made. The 2 back pieces of the upper, simply called the backs, were brought together by a system of cross-stitching. In his early days, Joe had to do this by hand, as the machines available then were not able to penetrate the hard leathers in use at that time. Joe became the proud owner of his superb Singer sewing machine when he bought it, slightly used, in 1936 for the princely sum of £60. Cross-stitching was a slow process, even with experienced hands. Razor-sharp edge was necessary for feathering, whereby the edge of the leather was gradually thinned out. This was necessary on all overlapping parts to obtain a neat finish on stitching. The back of the upper was secured with a back strap, a piece of upper leather which was shaped and feathered to overlap the cross-stitching by 1/4 of an inch on each side. Joe was glad of his sewing machine for this job, as it left both hands free to guide the leather in the varied path of this stitch. This operation also secured the lining at the important area of heel contact. Of course, the front part of the upper could more easily have been assembled without a toe cap. Indeed, common or working boots did not have a toe cap, but this little ornamentation was very desirable on Sunday boots. The close stitching of the machine was ideal for stitching the toe cap to the vamp, that midsection between the toe cap and back, which also had the tongue. The upper was finally assembled by sewing the vamp section to the backs, with a curved stitch from the base of the tongue to the arch of the foot. All lap-made boots were made on wooden laths. These laths were made of beechwood and had a detachable instep section to facilitate the withdrawal of the last from the finished boot. Each pair of laths were marked for different measurements. Each client had to be measured, and if one foot was bigger, a pair of laths to fit the smaller foot was chosen, and adjustments by tacking strips of leather for padding were made to suit the larger foot. The insole, of course, was the foundation of every boot or shoe, and was cut from leather cut from the cow's belly hide. The insole was attached to the sole of the last with 3 or 4 tacks 1 inch long, driven halfways, then bent over and the heads hammered into the leather. This method kept the insole firmly in place and helped the easy location and withdrawal of these tacks later. Failure to withdraw these tacks before the upper proper was put on the boot would result in the last not being able to be removed from the boot. The last would have to be broken to remove it. Having pared the inside to manageable limits, Joe used the back of his knife to mark off the areas of the sole, at the ball of the foot and the start of the heel, with the arch in between. To make progress at the cutting and paring stages, the shoemaker's knives needed sharpening about every 10 minutes. And in his 60-odd years in the trade, Joe reckons that he must have worn out over 100 knives. Along with the edge, he also needed a steady hand and a measuring eye. Every slip meant waste of time and material. Accurate cutting saved material and also time at rasping later on. 2 grooves were cut near the edge of the insole to make a ridge for anchoring the stitches later. Joe used a special tool called elasting pincers to pull the upper and lining down over the insole. Great care had to be exercised to make sure that this job was neatly done. Otherwise, wrinkles on the outside would be unacceptable and most uncomfortable on the inside. A number of tacks at chosen points ensured that the desired position of the material would be maintained. The welt, a strip of harness or belly harness leather about 1 inch wide, could be described as the backbone of the boot, because it was used as a means of bonding the upper and sole together. Welts were cut according to the type of boot required. The normal welt braced the front part of the boot, finishing at the start of the heel on either side. The half-welted boot had the welt from the ball of the foot outwards, leaving the shank and heel to be pegged, while on the fully welted boot the welt braced the full upper and sole. Because they did a lot of walking and took great pride in their footwear, cattle dealers usually ordered fully welted boots. Having been soaked in water to soften it, a channel was cut around the edge of the welt strip with a channel knife. Of course, stitching round the base of the boot had to be done with wax cord because of its waterproof and rot-free properties. 24 strands of thread were used to make up the cord, and the wax was handmade by boiling 1 pint of resin, 1/2 pound of pitch, and 2 ounces of unsalted butter in an iron pot. After boiling, the contents were pulled apart for an hour to obtain the proper texture, then made into little balls and placed in cold water to harden. The sewing tips were got from Russian boar's whiskers. The welt was placed round the base of the boot upper with the channel outwards and at the bottom. The channel held the stitches and also helped the bending of the welt strip at right angles to meet the sole of the boot later. The welt was stitched through the channel onto the ridge of the insole, with the upper sandwiched between the two. A special awl was used to make the opening for these stitches. Shoemakers called it a square awl, presumably because it was not round like the usual awls. Like a packing needle, the working end of this awl was oval in shape and had a curved shank to suit this type of work. It was made of highly tempered steel, and if twisted in the leather it would snap. Welt stitching was hard work, needing strength to pull through the 24 strands making up the wax cord. When the welt was stitched on, only 1 wax cord was used to secure the rear portion of the upper onto the insole in the heel area. This system was called bracing. Now that the framework of the boot was completed, it was necessary to remove the 3 tacks which secured the insole to the base of the last. Keen craftsmen like Joe were forever checking on the progress and neatness of their work. Now all surplus material from the upper and the welt was removed by paring to make an even platform for the sole proper. The sole was cut a little oversize from soling leather about 3/8 of an inch thick, and was held in position for stitching by a few 1/4 inch tacks. The surplus edge was removed by paring. A sloping incision was made about 1/4 of an inch inside the edge of the sole. With the edge of a channel knife, this incision was opened into a furrow to accommodate the sole stitching. The sole was stitched onto the welt. Sole stitching required strong arms to pull the wax cords through the neat openings of the oval awl. In the pulling process, the two cords wound and twisted around each other to form a wax-sealed rivet, which would outwear the sole of the boot. When the sewing was completed, Joe closed the sole groove with the handle of the knife. The heel area was secured to the insole, which had already been braced to the upper, by a system called pegging. Pegwork is a skill dating back more than 150 years, and is one of the first known methods of securing leather soles to the uppers. The pegs, which resembled bits of pointed matchsticks, were available in lengths of 1/2 inch, 5/8, and 3/4. 1/2 inch pegs were used on Sunday boots like these. A peg awl, with a tip to correspond with the size of the peg being used, made the holes for these pegs. The pegs, made from native timbers, were very kind to leather and would swell in wet conditions to form a watertight seal. The heel was levelled with a split level, a strip of leather which the shoemaker called a ready reckoner. From there, the heel was built up by tacking on other pieces of sole leather to the desired height. Joe, being a craftsman who took great pride in his work, spared himself no effort to present his finished product to the best possible standards. First, the rough edges were rasped off. The edges were then planed smooth with a buff plate, which Joe made from a piece of broken saw blade, which was rounded and sharpened like a knife. The edge was then flattened by rubbing with an awl or the back of a knife to make an efficient planer spokeshave. Joe maintained that a shoemaker's spit was as good as a tailor's uncle. He spat on everything. A stitch splitter was used with effect between the stitches on the welt, and likewise a fudge wheel was used on the heel section. The sole and heel was done with heel ball, made from candle grease or fat with added lacquer. This effect was polished with heating irons, a 4-iron for the front part of the boot and a seat iron for the heel section. Some elbow grease polished off the job. Oh. All that now remained was to remove the timber last from the boot. The last was made in 2 sections to facilitate this job, and the instep section was removed first. Removal of the main section required a good deal of effort, but with a lifetime's experience, Joe knew exactly how to coax the two apart. The last was then reassembled for the next customer.
Like all other handcrafts, the art of shoemaking has lashed out to the machine mass product and to the imports. There's only one shoemaker's shop in the town of Listowel now, Tom Sweet, and he's the third generation of shoemakers, and he's the last, sad to say. He works on his own at the top of Church Street, the same street where I started over 30 years ago. Popular shoemaker shops were great meeting places in those days. So in order to survive, every shoemaker and cobbler had to learn to talk to his customers and friends without looking up from his work. A hard thing to do. One thing has failed me. I can't keep on talking and keep my shagging pipe alight. Even yesterday, didn't Bunny Dalton say to me, "Joe Sheen, you burns more fucking matches than tobacco." Oh, by the way, Tom, did I ever tell you about Mickey Lucknan below? There was this fella came into town one day, you know what, and he was a bit simple. And the bright boy put him up to a trick. Now, I should tell you that Mickey Lucknan was an awful cranky man, and he couldn't bear anyone to be staring at him or to be looking at him. He was so intent on his work. And he was like, how would I describe him at all? He was like a rat that we put in a strange bread. He was very suspicious. But this poor Ramadan anyway, he was told by the white boys that there was